Hey there, Fletch from All Things Overlanding here, and today I'm going to be talking about this pretty interesting article that I found on a website called Off-Roadium. It is essentially talking about the popularity of overlanding, and they did some actual sort of studies. They actually compared a few different sources to kind of see what was the peak of overlanding in the USA. Has it peaked? Is it going to keep growing? Again, I wanted to talk through this with you guys a little bit, just kind of show you this. If you're on the podcast and you're listening, I'm going to describe everything that I'm talking about. If you're on YouTube or if you're on Spotify and you're watching this, I'm also going to share my screen so that you can see that. So let's get into overlanding in the USA and analyzing trends and future growth.
Understand where it came from, but you got it, my got it. It began in the land of the sandstorm. I fought it, though I wanted everything to do with what you gave to me. Loosening my grip.
All right, guys, so as I mentioned in the intro, today I'm talking about the popularity of overlanding in the USA and kind of analyzing trends. Now, I found this awesome article, and I'll link to it in the description down below on a webpage called Off-Roadium, written by a guy named Matt Grabley. It's from November of 2023, so it's pretty recent, and he analyzed about 10 years of data from Google Trends and a couple other sources. And it's really fascinating, right? Like it's really cool to sort of see someone take a sort of a dynamic, data-driven approach to this thing. I think, a lot of us that have been into overlanding for the last, call it 3 to 8 years, have seen this growth, right? Like when I first started, quote unquote, started my YouTube channel was 2016, which is exactly when Matt started his data growth, right? And I even remember back then being like, why have I not heard of this before, right? Like this seems so cool. I was into off-roading, I was into Nissans, and so I was literally just looking for like Nissan Xterra off-roading. And I sort of stumbled across a few channels that had Xterras that were doing overlanding. And that's kind of what got me into it. I'm like, oh man, I can go camping. I love camping and I like off-roading. And these two kind of combine those two things. And that's awesome. That's exactly what I want to do. So that was kind of how I stumbled into it. It was a total accident. I literally Googled it, found a few YouTube videos. And so that sort of sucked me into it and got me excited about not only off-roading my Xterra, but using it to get to places that other people couldn't get to, right? And then to basically be reliant on that vehicle, whether it be a fridge, battery power, sleeping accommodations, carrying all my gear right, helping me get out to those remote places. So as we look at this article, that's kind of where my head goes, right? Is like, that's when this data starts, is basically when I started. So again, if you're on YouTube, you can see my screen. I'm going to sort of bounce back and forth between my face and the article. Same with if you're on Spotify, but if you're just on the podcast, again, I'm going to describe everything that I'm talking about. So even if you can't see it, not a big deal. So, he kind of breaks out what the goals of the research was here. And it was basically to look at Google Trends data and try and figure out, like, when did it sort of start? When did it peak? Is it growing? How much is it growing? What parts of the country is it growing in faster than others? Where's the search volume at? So that was kind of what he did in his research. Now, he starts by defining overlanding, and I think most of us know what this is. My super simple definition, though, is just vehicle-reliant travel, right? So going out and exploring, but having everything that you need in your vehicle to be self-sufficient, right? To get to where you're going, to cook and have food, to sleep, to go to the bathroom, right? You're totally reliant. You can be completely dispersed and out in the middle of nowhere. So we'll skip over that part. That was basically my definition, which is really similar to his. He talks a little bit about the history of it, overlanding, and, its basis in getting to remote places in order to do work was a lot of it back in the olden days in Africa and Asia and Australia, of course, is kind of the big one that we in America hear about a lot. And we kind of, I think, try and mimic what they do in Australia. We've got tray builds coming over here now. We've got canopies. We've got all these different types of vehicles that previously were never in the US, right? Like it was bolt-on stuff on trucks. Now people are starting to rip their whole beds off their trucks and build flatbeds or build canopy builds onto them. And it's really fascinating to see. But so again, one of the main pieces of data that he uses is Google Trends. If you're not familiar with this, you can literally Google Trends, and then it takes you to a website. You can type in any search phrase that you want. If you want to see, is Coca-Cola trending, and like how many searches has Coca-Cola gotten year over year, and look at some period of time, you can do that. I've actually done this years ago. In one of my earlier episodes, I found some stuff on Google Trends in like the 2016-17 area, and I looked back and there was like nothing on overlanding from like 2000 on, which I think Google Trends started collecting data in like 2000 or early 2000s, and it's just totally flat. And then like, again, around like 2012, 14, 16, that's when you start to just see a spike of overlanding. And then since then, it's just gone bonkers, right? So Again, here are his sort of research purposes in the article. He says he wanted to know the origination and time of growing interest. He wanted to know the peak periods of interest. So like, again, has it grown and then kind of peaked out and then fallen off? He wants total growth in search volume since origination, and then he wants seasonal patterns and interest. So he also looked for, does it get more, do you get more search traffic in summer versus fall versus winter? Like when are people searching and when are they camping? And then regional differences, right? So like, is the East Coast more popular for overlanding or the West Coast? I think we all know the answer to this, and you're going to see it in the data here in a second, but I unfortunately am in the Midwest, so I'm kind of in the minority over here, but I'm trying to bring the data to you guys, and I'm trying to do as much overlanding as I can. I've been all over the Midwest, and there's a ton of cool stuff over here. It may not be Moab, it may not be Black Bear Pass, it may not be the Wyoming BDR that I did a year or so ago. But it is still, there's a ton of really cool stuff to see and really fun ways to get out and explore and have fun in your rig. But so then he kind of walks through his methods here, and I'm not going to bore you with this, but he looked basically at data from, again, about March 2016 until the latest data that he had, which was November of 2023, which was when this article was written. And then the same from the state level data. So then he looked at it by region, and then he kind of breaks it out and he gives kind of an overview of what he found there. So then, and I'm showing it here on the screen, but for you on the podcast, I'm going to tell you, basically there was almost no search volume in the USA for overlanding until about 2016. And then in 2016, it kind of spikes. And again, that's literally right when I got in it. So I don't know if I just got caught up. I mean, if you think about it, YouTube is a giant algorithm, right? Like it's a giant search engine. So probably the same thing that sucked me in when I just went Xterra off-road. It said, yeah, we got some off-roading stuff, but we got a ton of this overlanding stuff and people really seem to be liking it. So maybe it showed me the overlanding stuff and literally swayed my whole trajectory of my hobby away from just off-roading and Xterra and towards overlanding. And maybe it was doing that for a ton of us too. So it could be Google's fault. It could just be too that we were kind of all just looking for something at that time. I think people my age, like I was born in 80. So, people my age, I think a lot of us still were like big on cars. We were independent. We recognized the freedom that having a vehicle of your own gave you. And I was a super big car person all the way from, high school until now. I still am. I love cars. I love trucks. I like off-roading. I like racing. I like everything to do with vehicles. And I still view it as freedom. Like sometimes when I'm bored, I'll just get in the truck or I'll get in my car and I'll go out and I'll just drive on some country back roads for a little bit, just kind of unwind. So, it could be people my age too that are kind of driving this trend. But then the fascinating thing is then it actually kind of drops off a little bit after 2016, drops back down a little bit. And then you hit COVID, right? 2019, 2020, that starts to spike. And I mean, it just skyrockets. It goes up and then it does go up in 2020, 2021. It drops a little bit in 2022 and then it goes back up in 2023. So the interesting thing is I think I made a video maybe a year ago, a podcast episode that was about, is overlanding, tapped out? Are we at the peak? Is this the peak? And my thought is maybe a little bit, because it was definitely feeling like it was kind of, slowing down a little bit. Consumption of the content was slowing down a little bit. But I said, I think what's happening is the loyalists, the people that really got into it, I think a lot of people got into it in COVID times. And then a lot of people figured out it is a little tough, right? Like you still do have to go out and camp. Like if you're not someone that can be away from internet and devices for a few days at a time or more, then overlanding may not be for you, right? So I think there was a lot of people bought a bunch of gear, and then I think we've seen a lot of used gear on Facebook Marketplace and things like that. And that is kind of a result of that. But I also think it caught a lot of people like me that were into camping, into vehicles, and now it's, combined those two hobbies, and the loyalists, the people like me that are like, man, I love this. I want to do this forever. I look forward to retiring and going on longer trips and being able to go and explore places that I haven't been able to get yet because I have a job, that kind of thing. I'm actually in it more now than I was even a few years ago, right? And so that's kind of what this data shows out here. Now he does show some kind of peak interest periods, and you can see that in the data, right? Like it's like 2017, it's up a little bit, then it slows down a little bit, goes up more in 2019, and then in 2020, it spikes. In 2021, it goes up even more because, again, we're riding out COVID, right? We're all still kind of trapped in our homes and we want to get out and do something. 2022, it dropped a tiny bit. Not much, but it dropped a little bit. And then 2023, it's actually gone back up. So, again, the data kind of bears out that while it dropped off a little bit after COVID, it's not like it plummeted, right? It's not like it completely died out. We lost a little bit of interest, but it's still there and it's still growing. When you look at events like Overland Expo, there's East, there's West, there's Pacific Northwest. Now they've got a new event that they're coming out with. And then there's all these other non-Overland Expo events too that are going on, like the More Expo, Core up in the Upper Peninsula, which is where I was a few weeks ago. those kind of events are growing, and there just seems to be more and more of them. And all of these events are getting thousands, if not tens of thousands of attendees. And it's awesome and fascinating to see that. But they're so much fun. I think the fact that they combine education with vendors, with the experience of camping and getting to see other people's rigs. Sometimes the parking lot is the most fun place to be. And in almost all those events that I go to, I generally make a video that's like coolest rigs I found in the parking lot, because a lot of the times that's where the interesting stuff is. That's where we DIYers are. That's where the really unique builds are and stuff. So, there's just such a smattering of a ton of different information and cool stuff that you can see there that I think that keeps that interest going. Again, for car people, I think it keeps it going. For, those of us that have found overlanding as a real hobby that we really love, it really keeps us engaged. Now, he did do some analysis on seasonal patterns, like I mentioned. The most searches seem to be June, July, August. And I kind of find that interesting, because I think that what that is I think that a lot of folks, and this is not a slam at all, like if you are a summer person, good for you. I personally despise summer because I hate bugs and I don't like sweating, and you can only take off so many layers, but in the winter you can, add jackets and heated coats and have a diesel heater, and I can make up for any cold weather. I've slept in -20 before with a diesel heater and a good sleeping bag and been super comfortable, right? But in the summer, if it's 95 and super humid and the bugs are really bad and it's pouring down rain, I'm not having a good time. But again, I think a lot of people, they view the winter stuff as super tricky, super tough. You do definitely have to have the right gear to do it. But so I think that the vast majority of overlanders do like to go in the summer. Another thing to keep in mind is I'm coming from a Midwestern, and we'll get into regionality here in a second, but I'm coming from a Midwestern standpoint where in the Midwest, it's super humid, super buggy, and just overall miserable, right? But if you're out west, you can go up into the mountains. You can go down into the valleys during the day, and sure, it might be 95, 100 degrees, but then you can go up onto a mountain at 8, 9, 10,000 feet, and you can camp in 60s, right? So you can adjust that heat in the summer if you're out west. And again, when we get into regionality, you'll see a little bit of that it's definitely most popular out there. And that, I think, explains a lot of the seasonality of it too, is that those folks out west, where it's the most popular, also are doing the most camping during the summer, whereas folks like me, I'm here building my rig in the summer. I'm here, I will go on trips. Don't get me wrong. I can't go more than 2 or 3 weeks without going on a camping trip. But I'm mostly just trying to revamp my build and add gear and stuff and do research and that sort of thing during the summer months so that I can get out in fall and then throughout the winter. Those are my seasons. But so again, most of the search traffic coming in the summer, that makes sense. It drops off a little bit later on, but then in the fall, it's still pretty popular. And then, winter is when it drops off the most, which again is interesting to me because that's my favorite season. So then regionality. So the top 10 states that he found were, pretty much all out west. So you've got the highest is Montana, followed by Idaho, Utah, Wyoming, Colorado, Oregon, Alaska, Washington, New Mexico, and Arizona. Those are your top 10. Of course, again, that makes a ton of sense because we poor people in the Midwest are just, it's not a good place. Same with out east. There's just not as much stuff. I've explored a lot of Ohio, a lot of Illinois. It's really tough to find dispersed camping in those states. We have a little bit in Hoosier National Forest in Indiana, but I mainly go up to Wisconsin, Michigan, or down to Kentucky. Those are kind of the only places where there's really some wheeling and some dispersed camping. But so yeah, not a surprise at all that out west it is more popular. Now, states with the least interest in overlanding, come to find out, my state of Indiana is 14th place in the least interested in overlanding. So I'm just one of the weirdos here, I guess. But New Jersey is one of the least interested. DC makes a ton of sense. There's not really any place, I don't think, to go camping or overlanding in DC. New York, Illinois, Massachusetts, Connecticut, these are the least popular states. And that makes a ton of sense, right? There's just not as much out east. It's more developed. But there is, you're close to Virginia. I'll drive 8-10 hours to go to West Virginia or Virginia, and it's not a bad drive for me. I know it just in the Midwest, I have to drive 6 to 10 hours to get to a decent destination in most cases. And that's just something I live with. So then just to kind of wrap it up here, some of the interesting data that the conclusions that he draws is, in 2023, search volume, so just looking at search volume, was about 20 times higher than early 2016. So again, when you think about that, right, I kind of got into it in 2016 and I felt like no one was talking about it. When I started to make, my content and my videos, I was like, there's a few other guys out here, that are making content like Expedition Overland and Mountain State Overland and Lifestyle Overland and Trail Recon. And, some of those guys were around back then, but that was about it, right? And then as I started to kind of get into it, I really didn't make much content until 2019, 2020. That's when it picked up a lot for me. It was just something I kind of thought about in 2016 and I started to do and build my Xterra. But then I didn't really start actually making YouTube content until 2019. And about that time, then I felt like every day there's new YouTube channels popping up and you can't even sort through, you know, the from one to the next. They're all just different and they all have their own cool, unique things. And that's kind of what I love about Overlanding. Yes, there's a lot of negativity. There's a lot of people out there just pooping on people's dreams and trying to be negative to people. And yes, there are a lot of channels. And some of them, you know, a lot of my content, especially in the past, has been lackluster, I'll say. But, you know, I'm constantly trying to improve and I try and support all the new folks when they get into it. I don't think there's anything wrong with going out and trying to shoot it. If you enjoy it, do it, right? And if you get 100,000 subscribers, you get 5,000 subscribers, you get 10 subscribers. It doesn't matter. If you're enjoying it and you're having fun, do it for the love of it. Don't do it for the growth. Don't do it for the money, right? Like I think that's a bad approach to take to doing like YouTube or doing this for money kind of a thing. But again, I spend probably 20 to 30 hours a week working on content. I put out a couple of videos every week and I really enjoy it. And I love sharing with you guys and I love the positivity. While there is some negativity, there always is online, there is also a ton of positivity. There's a ton of new folks and I love shaking hands with people that say, hey, I watched this video, or talking to people that are like, hey, I did my Xterra like this because I saw you did that. That stuff is super fun for me. Supporting the community, especially the Nissan community, which I feel like is pretty underrepresented, has been one of the most fun things that I've ever done. So again, I think you can kind of see that in this data that there is a lot of love for overlanding. There is a lot of desire for people to learn more and more about overlanding. And I love that. I just think it's so cool, right? And again, people that are not interested in it or, you know, think that it's overblown or anything like that, that's fine. You don't have to do it. Right? I do see a lot of people that are jumping into these Facebook groups and just sort of poo-pooing on everybody else's builds. And if you didn't do it this way, it's not right. Personally, I think that's the completely wrong approach. I think that we should all support each other. We should let each other do what we want with our own money, right? Like, who cares what someone else does with their money? If you want to build a $150,000 Toyota Tacoma, it's going to be a sweet rig. If I want to build a $20,000 total, really sweet Titan swapped second-gen Nissan Frontier or Xterra, and is a really budget build, but it can get a lot of places and it's really unique and cool in its own way and didn't cost much, that's cool, right? So a lifted Audi wagon would be a cool build, right? I would love to do like an Infiniti QX80, the Armada basically, and do a stealth build inside of that someday. Like, I have all these ideas for things that I want to do, and I think a lot of you guys do too. And as this data sort of bears out, there's just a ton of interest in it. And I think that we can all enjoy it in our own ways and just keep growing in it. So those are my thoughts on this data. Those are my thoughts on kind of the trend of overlanding and where it is today as of, you know, September 2024. We'll see what happens here in a few years if I'm still here, if I'm still making content and come back to you guys and maybe do like an update video. But I hope that was interesting for you. So of course, if it was helpful for you and you're on YouTube, click that like button. If you're not already subscribed to the YouTube channel, make sure to click that subscribe button, click the bell to be notified when new videos drop. If you're on the podcast, add it to your favorites. Leave a 5-star review. That helps a ton and it shows people that, you know, that there's value in the podcast and helps other people find it. Also below this video, if you're on YouTube, is a join button. That's just kind of a nice passive way to support the channel. It also gives you early access to the podcast and all the other videos that I do. I do a couple every week, so there's tons of content there. And if you want early access, check out the join button. Again, if you're on the podcast, there is a Patreon link. And if you're on YouTube, honestly, there's a link to my Patreon page, which is a little bit more active way to support the channel. You get access to a 24/7 Discord where we all kind of chat about our rigs. I'm actually just asked all my Patreon people for like, what questions would you ask if you could ask me anything? And I'm going to do an episode on that here in the future too. So the Patreon is a really cool place to be as well. There's also a link to my website down below where I've got funny overlanding camping themed patches and stickers. So if you're into that kind of stuff, things like I hate people so I camp, or Weekend Warrior and it's a jerry can, that kind of thing, check those out. And then last but not least, there is a link to the Newbie Overlanders Facebook group. This is a group that I run that is trying to be different than the big groups, right? Like, we want to focus on helping newbies. And even if you're not a newbie and you want to just go to a place where there's not bullying, it's not just constantly crapping on everybody, it's a more positive environment where you can kind of share your experience. That's a really cool place. And we've got almost 20,000 people in that group now after just a couple of years. So it's growing really fast. But again, that will wrap it up for trends in overlanding and kind of where I think it's going. I hope that was helpful for you, and we'll see you next week.